Welcome in to One of One Sports, the only one for your original sports commentary and analysis. I'm John Barry. We officially have the college football playoff bracket, so let's react to it. All right, before we get started, if you guys are enjoying the content on the channel, any of the college football content, of course, I'm trying to hit 300 subscribers. Now we will say we got to extend it. I was trying to hit it by yesterday, didn't quite get there, so let's extend it to by the first round of the college football playoff. That sounds like a good date, and I'm almost there. I just need you guys just a little bit of help to get there. I think we're 16 away, so we'll be there soon. But with that being said, there was some controversy with these playoff rankings given by the committee. And let me pull them up so I have them here in front of me. And let's just talk about it. I'll put my rankings for what, because the way I want to do is first I want to talk about, did the committee get the right rankings compared to what I thought they should have had? And then we can talk about, based off what they already had, did they make the right adjustments? Because there's a difference between what I thought they should have done multiple weeks ago versus what they did now. And we will talk about the process this committee is using, why it is so flawed, and then we'll end talking about the preview of the matchups. And while we do this, what I'm saying, what I agree with, disagree with, I'll touch a little bit on the games that were played. So for example, 1 and 2, I agree with. We'll put them up on the screen. You can put my 1 through 12 and we'll just walk through it one at a time. Indiana had to move to 1. I think it's pretty obvious. You were number 2 before for the College Football Playoff Committee. I had you number 1. And although I predicted Indiana to win the game, it's one thing to predict something. It's another thing to see it actually come to fruition. And like the feeling I felt when Indiana hit that Mendoza hit that final pass to seal the game. It was like, wow, they've really done this. It's the best coaching job I've ever seen in college football, hands down. I don't want to hear Kirby Smart. I don't want to hear Ryan Day. Curt Cignetti is the best coach in college football. There's no doubt about it. There is nothing anyone has done more impressive than what he has done, not only last year, but now this year, turning around Indiana football. And Ryan Day, I mean, it had to be deja vu for Buckeyes fans. Not only was it 13-10, not only was it the missed field goal, the conservative play calling. I mean, everything about it reminded you of the Michigan game last year. For Buckeyes fans, you just got to hope that the rest of the playoff also gives you deja vu and you can repeat as national champions bouncing back. But as far as that went, Indiana had to move to 1. I think everyone pretty much agreed with that. Maybe some people wanted Georgia to jump Ohio State. I'm not a fan of dropping teams for conference championship games more than they have to be dropped. So Indiana had to jump Ohio State. Georgia, though, I thought over the 12-game body of work, Ohio State was clearly better. And then the last game, I didn't think losing to Indiana was enough, substantial enough to move Ohio State below Georgia. And either way, it doesn't really matter because 2 and 3 would end up playing each other, right? I mean, I guess if you think 6 versus, if you think there's a big gap between Ole Miss, the A&Ms, maybe you think that's a big difference, but I don't really think that, so I think it's fine, and I agree with it. And then Texas Tech, I think at 4 was pretty uncontroversial as well. They crushed BYU. Georgia crushed Alabama. You weren't going to see a big jump there. And I shouldn't skip over Georgia so fast because what they did to Alabama was crazy. -3 rushing yards. The defense has come on so strong these final few weeks, finally looking like Georgia. A pass rush has emerged, which was something that was absent at least like a little past halfway point of the season. And Gunnar Stockton looked pretty decent. I think he's going to have to play better for them to actually make a run at the national championship than he had against Georgia Tech. Looked better against Alabama. He's got to keep that up. But yeah, it was more so just the physicality Georgia showed, especially in that run defense. And I know Alabama's not a good run team, but holding anyone to -3 yards is super impressive. And then, like I said, Texas Tech crushed BYU, and the turnover anomalies in those games are ridiculous to me. I'll talk about that when I get a little bit lower on the list. 5 is Oregon, and for me, this Oregon A&M Ole Miss thing, I didn't really care about the order, but the order is crucial because the difference in having to play, if you're Texas A&M, having to play Miami versus if they had put Oregon or Ole Miss to play Miami, like Oregon and Ole Miss, I'm sorry to say, I'm not trying to be anti-G5. They basically got a free pass to the second round. Tulane and James Madison are not winning road games at Oregon and Ole Miss against well-rested, focused teams. It's just not going to happen. Miami absolutely could win against any of those teams, absolutely has the requisite talent to give those teams a challenge. So I don't think it's like an egregious error or anything for Ole Miss to be ranked ahead of A&M. Like I had them flipped. I do think it's just a critical choice. So I think you're splitting hairs here. Like A&M has Notre Dame win, Ole Miss has the Oklahoma win. I know A&M's strength of schedule says it's way better, but when you actually look at the teams, like you can't find that big of a difference on these schedules. Both have one really strong win against a top-ranked team on the road, Notre Dame versus Oklahoma. A loss to a good team, Ole Miss being to Georgia on the road, A&M's being to Texas on the road, and then intermixed with a lot of similar opponents. Like both beat Florida, both beat South Carolina. I think there's a couple more SEC teams. They both played. Auburn's going to be on there. They beat them similarly. I said that really weird, but you get what I'm trying to say. So there's not a huge difference between those teams. I slightly favored A&M because of the strength of schedule, strength of record, slightly higher. I like the game control elements. But if you want to go Ole Miss, it's fine. It's just such an easier path now for Ole Miss than it is for A&M. So if you're the Aggies, you do have to be pretty upset. And I'd slightly agree with Oregon ahead of both of them. All right, now we start getting into a little bit of the controversial parts of where I differ from the committee, with my 8, 9, 10 going BYU, Miami, Texas. The committee went Oklahoma, Alabama, Miami. So almost completely different, and neither of us had Notre Dame, which I'll talk about. So why I have BYU at 8, because I feel like most people aren't going to agree with this because they got crushed by Texas Tech. The reason I have BYU at 8 is because I already had BYU at 8. And for the way I do rankings, right? When I'm creating how do I want to do a ranking systems, it's supposed to reflect a way to rank teams that's also good for the sport. And I'll talk about this with Miami, and I'll talk about these for Texas. Each of these things provides something that I think is good for the sport. So for BYU, the reason they're going to remain at 8 is because I think it is bad to punish teams for losing conference championship games for teams that didn't play in those games, right? So I already had BYU at 8. I wasn't going to drop them for losing the conference championship game because I believe in principle conference championship games serve as a reward and shouldn't have any punitive effect. Clearly the committee disagreed. BYU dropped below Miami, right? So conference championship games for them are different, but for the way I rank teams, I already had BYU at 8. They're not going to drop for losing at Texas Tech. And I will want to point out with BYU, for 11 games worth of their schedule, they played 13. 11 of those games were an elite turnover differential team, top 5 in the country, and in 2 games against Texas Tech was -7. That is pretty absurd. And yeah, I had them at 8. And then Miami at 9. Why were they going to be at 9? Well, they had to be ahead of Notre Dame because they beat Notre Dame and had nearly identical resumes. When you're looking at game control, strength of record, strength of schedule, all these metrics, they're so close within all of them that, yes, when you need a tiebreaker, it doesn't matter if it's week 1. It doesn't matter if it was by 3 points, whatever it was, you're going to go with the on-field result because head-to-head is the biggest thing that matters in competitive sports. Who won the games is what matters, not who has higher efficiency rankings, not who looked better subjectively, not who you think might be better now. The number one thing you have to take into account is the games that happen on the field or on the court if you're talking basketball. Whatever you are, the games are what matters, A1. So if 2 teams played each other, that is the most important data point. Because they say it's a data point, which I agree with. It's not the only one. But when it is between comparable teams, it is the most important one. And it's what is going to come through. And then Texas, it's a scheduling thing for me. I want to incentivize teams to play big out-of-conference games. And by leaving Texas out, especially for a team like Oklahoma, I think you're not doing that. We're already seeing Sarkisian come out and say Texas is going to reevaluate their future non-conference scheduling. And they absolutely should, because I know what everyone says, because I made a video on this and people strongly, passionately, like really, really disagree with me. Like they think it's like the dumbest thing they've ever heard to have Texas in the playoff because Texas has 3 losses. You can't put them in 3 losses, 3 losses, 3 losses, right? It's been so ingrained into college football fans, this myth that you just, and Josh Pate talks about this all the time, that you are what your record says you are. No, you're not. You're just not. So Texas being 9-3, when you played a third of the playoff teams, you played Oklahoma, you played A&M, you played Georgia, you played Ohio State, is a lot different than, I don't know, off the top, like a USC 9-3, or you get what I'm saying, right? It's not all 9-3 teams are created equal, and all 10-2 teams are not created equal. So everyone's going to point to the Florida loss. They're going to say, well, if Texas had beaten Florida, they would have been in the playoff. Sure, I will grant that. But I have to ask this question, and I've been asking everyone this, and a lot of people either, I think, say a crazy response or kind of try to play it off or admit, oh, you might be right. And that is, if week 1, Texas, instead of scheduling Ohio State, right? Because you lost by 7 points on the road to Ohio State, the number 2 ranked team in the country. If instead of scheduling Ohio State, you scheduled a road game against Purdue or Rutgers, the worst team in the Big Ten, still a power team, but worst team in the Big Ten, and you won that game, right? You win that. You're now 10-2. Do you think 10-2 Texas, with a 17-point head-to-head win over Oklahoma, with a 10-point win over A&M, with their losses to Georgia and Florida, is ranked higher than a 10-2 Oklahoma? because they absolutely are going to be. You saw what they just did with Miami and Notre Dame. The same thing would have happened. Texas would have been in. And what that is in principle saying is that it is better to get a win against a terrible team who can't compete against you at all in Purdue than lose close to a really good team. And that's just bad for the future of college football scheduling, which is why for me, I would have put Texas in, and then Tulane and JMU. Yeah, look, they had to be in. I think that'll be tweaked. They'll change this. They'll limit it so you can't get two G5 teams in, because we absolutely don't need two G5 teams in the playoff. I would argue we don't need one. What we need is a separate G5 playoff, where if you gave me a playoff right now where Tulane's in that and James Madison's in that, and we get some Boise State and North Texas can compete as well, even like Kennesaw State's a pretty good team. It's like, oh, we get some real teams playing for a G5 title. That would be fun to see. That would be a good product. And Josh Pate talked about that as well. Like, that would be really fun to see. We don't need two G5 teams in the playoff, but with the way the current system is, with the rules, there's no way, for me at least, there was no way I was going to rank Duke, Duke's just ridiculous. I don't even want to talk about Duke. I'm so mad because you go watch my preseason videos. I talk so much about Duke, dark horse AC contender, dark horse playoff contender, and then they end up having just such a strange season where I'm kind of right, but also just completely wrong about them. But yeah, there was no way I was going to rank 5-loss Duke ahead and put them in the playoff, right? So I would have had Oklahoma out because I prefer Texas. Alabama was stuck behind Oklahoma unless they got the SEC title win. They didn't, so Oklahoma's head-to-head there. So Alabama below as well. And then Notre Dame, look, you lost to Miami. You weren't going to be in ahead of them, right? So that is why I differed there. But now, just because I differ doesn't mean this is necessarily what I think they should have done, because there's a process to this. Once you have something set, you kind of have to follow through. You have to have some consistency, some criteria, something you are working towards. And that's why these rankings were even worse than just simple disagreements. Like me thinking Texas should be in is just a disagreement of how ranking should work, what we should reward, right? That's just a disagreement. What I'm going to talk about is just fundamental problems in process, in how they went about doing this right now, but I need a quick water break. All right, I'm back, and let's start with Notre Dame, who, yes, I think Notre Dame should clearly be very upset. And I say this as someone who would not have put Notre Dame in the playoff. You can see right here, I don't think Notre Dame should have been in. But that's because I already thought Notre Dame shouldn't have been in. There's so many issues. One, does it make any sense for them not to play in Miami to flip Notre Dame? No, absolutely not. And the excuse the committee gave were absolutely ridiculous, because how the committee works is they compare teams in pools, in groups. You don't compare 1, 1, 1, 1. So to say you had Notre Dame, Miami, and BYU in a pool, and the head-to-head you couldn't even use head-to-head then to flip them because you thought BYU was clearly out of Miami, but clearly below Notre Dame. And then you go on to talk about how Notre Dame and Miami had nearly identical resumes. Makes absolutely no sense, because you're saying they're basically identical, yet head-to-head couldn't factor in because BYU was so clearly above one and so clearly behind the other. So the process here for why this wasn't done earlier makes no sense, and why Notre Dame has a right to be mad. The other thing here is it does look like, if you just watch this, it looks like there's clearly an agenda at play here, because they clearly worked towards eventually getting Notre Dame and Miami next to each other, right? Because what happened last week, Notre Dame beat Stanford by a lot. I don't remember the exact score, but it was a blowout. And Alabama won a tight game over Auburn. So now neither of those teams were bowl teams. Neither were good teams, and they flipped Alabama and Notre Dame. Why? Kind of unclear. Now, is that in itself wrong? Was Alabama not supposed to be above Notre Dame? I was kind of fine with that. I thought Alabama had a good argument to be above Notre Dame, but it didn't make sense to switch them then. That's what I'm talking about with the process. If Alabama was ahead of Notre Dame, there's nothing that happened in week 12 that should have been, that was enough to change it, right? If you thought Notre Dame was better in week 11, they certainly should have been ranked higher in week 12. So that was confusing in of itself. And then when you keep going, why did BYU drop so that the gap wasn't there, yet Alabama stayed ahead? Because we can talk about conference championships. I've said that I don't believe conference champions should drop for teams that don't play in conference championship games. But the committee has disagreed every step of the way. If we go back last year, yes, SMU didn't drop out of the playoff, but they dropped below an Indiana team in the rankings, an Indiana team that didn't play a conference championship game, that had 0 wins against ranked opponents. SMU, for losing a 3-point game to Clemson, dropped. Every conference championship winner dropped this year. Ohio State had to drop for Indiana. BYU dropped because of the Texas Tech game. Virginia dropped for teams who didn't play because of the Duke game. Every conference champion, North Texas, dropped for losing. Every single one who lost a game, the committee, sorry, my nose really bothered me, decided to drop in the rankings for teams who did not play. So yes, teams were penalized for playing games, except Alabama. This is the only one, and they got blown out. It wasn't close, and yet the committee decided in this one circumstance, Alabama will be given preferential treatment, excuse me, and we won't drop them even in the slightest, which makes no sense because you said just last week that the margins between them and Notre Dame were so close that a tight win against Auburn is enough to flip it when Notre Dame blew out Stanford. So the debate was so tightly contested. It was so back and forth. And yet a 21-point loss to Georgia was not enough to drop at all. And like I said, in principle, I would agree with it if you applied the principle to all the conference champions, but you didn't. And that's what I'm talking about this process. There's no consistency. It's just when we want to drop conference champions, we'll drop them. When we don't, we'll keep them in. It's just the committee, whatever they have on a whim of deciding these things for when certain things apply. When do we use head-to-head? When do we not use head-to-head? When are they in groups? When do we have to be right next to each other? When does conference championships matter? When do they not? All these things. When is it strength of schedule? When is it game control? It's just nothing is consistent with this committee. That's why the process is so bad. And yes, why I think Notre Dame should be very upset. And yeah, I think BYU should have been upset weeks ago because if we just did blind resume, if you couldn't see the logos, or even if you did this, you showed them BYU's resume, but you take off that Y and you put a script red A, BYU's absolutely in the playoff. If you say they beat the number 15 in the country, they beat the number 17 team in the country, but they have a loss to the number 4 team and lost to the conference championship game, they're absolutely in if they're not BYU, right? But they were always going to be left out unless they won the game. They didn't. And then Texas, look, the committee just thinks differently on that front than I do. But that's enough, I think, about breaking down why the committee is so bad at their job when they only have one job, and yet they manage to fail at it nearly every year. But let's talk more transition, talking about the games, about the bracket, and our initial thoughts. Okay, so we have the 12 teams here. Bracket should be up on the screen. So first things is like who got a really good draw, who got a really tough draw. And right away, I think Ole Miss got a favorable draw here because obviously you avoided Miami, which A&M now has to play. So that's pretty much free win to the second round. And out of the top 4 schools, I think Ole Miss matches up best with Georgia. That's who they'd want to play, have the best shot to beat, and has already shown they can put up some points on this Georgia defense. So I thought they got a really good draw. And excuse me, Indiana, A&M versus Miami. I almost said Notre Dame. Sorry, Irish fans. Versus Miami could be tough. And then, because both those teams at times this year have shown the ceiling of a really high-end team. Texas Tech, I'm not going to say they are going to play Oregon. I'm sorry, James Madison, you're not winning that game. That is a huge game. I can't wait for that one. That's probably the one I'm most looking forward to of the potential second-round matchups. And then Ohio State playing... Oh, sorry. Why did I say... I read Indiana's Ohio State. Sorry. My bad. Ohio State playing Miami or Texas A&M could be close. Indiana playing Alabama or Oklahoma, I think is going to be pretty easy for them. Which sounds so weird. It's so weird to say, yeah, Oklahoma or Alabama, that's a pretty good draw. Pretty easy matchups for Indiana. It sounds ridiculous, but at this point, the way Oklahoma can't score, the way Alabama's beat up, can't run the ball, and struggled down the stretch, neither of those teams do I see giving Indiana a challenge. So what I do see here is right now, I see Oregon and Ole Miss blowouts, like 20-plus point wins and more first-round college football playoff blowouts. Alabama, Oklahoma, I think it's really tight. Obviously, Oklahoma won the first game, has the better defense, can stop the run. I'm slightly leaning Alabama right now. Like later next week, I'll look more into the matchups, analyze what I think could happen here. But even in the first game when Oklahoma won, Alabama definitely outplayed them, but it was the turnovers, which I've said many times is randomized. I'm not going to bank on that. If Alabama can protect the ball, maybe even win the turnover battle, I think they can pull off the road upset. And then Miami A&M, I just think A&M is a team that looks like they're running out of gas. Like down the stretch, they didn't seem to be playing with the same juice. They seem like they're just clinging. And while Miami seems to have gotten this second life, this second wave. So right now I am leaning Miami. They also avoided the Kyle Field night game. I think their O-line is, uniquely suited to handle what is maybe the best pass rush in the country in Texas A&M led by Cassius Howe. What a matchup between him and Francis Malinoa, right? And as long as Carson Beck doesn't have one of those 3 interception games, I think Miami can run the ball well enough. I think protection to hit Tonys of the world, the Marions, the CJ Daniels, And the defense is playing at a really high level and has a great pass rush of their own, maybe the best defensive end duo in Mesidor and Bain. So right now I would lean the Canes. And then when we get into the second round, like I said, Indiana, I don't think would have a problem with Alabama. That's just crazy, crazy, crazy. But I really think with the way Mendoza's playing, with those receivers, with the run defense anchored or supported, I should say, by an elite secondary, like I don't see how Alabama could win this game. I think they would win by at least 10 points, like double-digit victory for Indiana. Going down, like Ohio State, Miami, I'd be rooting so hard for Miami, and I do think they have the talent, but this is one where I do see like Ohio State clearly has an elite defense and now has proven it against one of the best offenses in the country at Indiana. So I do expect Beck to make some mistakes. I don't expect them to just lean on the run game. And if you put the game in Carson Beck's hands, which I think you may have to do to beat a team as good as Ohio State, he's shown time and time again he can make that critical mistake. So in a spot like this, unfortunately, I would have to go with the Buckeyes. It hurts to say. I also think for as much as Miami's secondary is improved, if Ohio State is anything like last year where they start opening up the playbook, letting them throw downfield to these receivers in Smith and Tate, Miami could absolutely be burned, and that O-line can hold up against pressure. So I would advance the Buckeyes. Georgia, Ole Miss rematch should be a lot of fun. Another one, this one really, really tough to pick. Right now, for me, it's just the coaching mismatch. And I think I'll talk about this at some point in the future. Like, this is Pete Golding's first game as a head coach, and you're going up against Kirby Smart in a college football playoff on the line. I can't, like, that's too big of a coaching mismatch in my eyes to pick the Rebels, so I will pick the Bulldogs. They've been here before. They look to be peaking or relatively close to peaking at the right time. I would advance them. And then Oregon, Texas Tech, so tough to choose. Line of scrimmage battle would be awesome. You have the likes of Isaiah World, Alex Harkey going up against the David Baileys, the Romello Heights, and then you have the best linebacker core maybe in the country led by Jacob Rodriguez. Oregon's pass defense has been elite. Baron Morton, when healthy, has anchored a great offense for Texas Tech as well. I've said I think Dante Moore is the best quarterback in the country. Don't know if I stand by that after seeing what Mendoza just did, but at the very least, I think he's elite. I think health's a big factor. Not only do we have regular health issues, like Oregon's waiting on did Corey and Moore come back, but also like long-term injuries. Like, what's up with Evan Stewart? Could he maybe be a factor at this point in the second round of college football playoff? Could he be back on Texas Tech end? Could Skylar Gill Howard be back in the middle? So there's some like long-term injuries. Are players going to come back? Are they not? That'll be interesting to keep track of if there's any news on that front. And right now, I am 50-50. The tiebreaker for me is just that I picked Oregon to win the national championship in the preseason, and I kind of want to be right, so I'm going to advance them as far as I can, unless I see what I really don't think they can beat. So right now, I am truly split. Like, Oregon is slightly more talented, has a little more weapons, but Texas Tech is better on the defensive front, can apply more pressure, and I think this game would be, I can't remember with this game. I think this is the Orange Bowl. This is in Miami, yeah, so it's not necessarily like a big advantage for anyone, but it's a long trip for Oregon. I will slightly lean the Ducks, though. Then semifinals, you're going to have Oregon, Indiana rematch, Ohio State, Georgia, a rematch of one from like 4 years ago, actually. And I'm leaning right now Oregon beating Indiana in a rematch. I do think Indiana is the best team in the country, which is crazy to say. I know I keep emphasizing, but it's just so mind-boggling how Indiana, one of the worst teams in the Power Four in just 2 years under Cignetti, is a powerhouse and a true national championship contender. A team I do think is better than Oregon, but the motivation I think Dan Lanning can have, the advantage of getting to try a second time. And I know it doesn't happen all the time, and I know the expression, it's hard to be a good team twice. I don't know if it's true or not, but look at Alabama, Georgia. Okay, so that's one example. BYU, Texas Tech went the other way. Duke, Virginia one way. So there are examples of the rematch going both ways. Right now I'm leaning Oregon. I think getting a second crack at Indiana, winning a close one, going to the title, and then Georgia, Ohio State. Kirby Smart versus Ryan Day would be a lot of fun. Obviously, two of the most talented rosters in the sport. I would have a big-time concerns about Georgia's secondary being able to hold up against Jeremiah Smith and Carnell Tate. And while their pass rush has come along, I don't know is ready to challenge Ohio State. And for those reasons, I'm leaning the Buckeyes to go to the national championship. And then they're not repeating. Dan Lanning gets revenge for last year's Rose Bowl kind of blowout. I think they can contain the receivers enough. Julian Sayin having to do more than just check the ball down. Maybe another interception, maybe two. Dante Moore at this point is playing at an elite level. The O-line is maybe the best in the country at this point. Like, all the youth, all the talent has now clicked by this point, probably clicks around earlier, and Oregon's playing the best ball of anyone in the country. I'm sticking for the moment. We'll have next week when I evaluate the matchups more. Maybe something changes, but as of right now, initial thoughts, I am sticking with my preseason national title pick, Dan Lanning and the Oregon Ducks to be national champions. Now, with that being said, that is all I have for today's episode. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel and comment. Did you agree with the playoff rankings? And also, who right now do you think is most likely to win the national championship? I will be back later in the week talking Heisman, but until then, I'll see you guys next time.